This is about how to kind of tap into the age-old ways of being a man, but in kind of smart, modern ways. If you are socially isolated, it starts to physiologically impact you.
So what do you think is the #1 problem facing the modern man right now? And there he is.
Hello.
The man, Mr. Tim Samuels. How you doing, man?
I'm good, I'm good.
For those people in my audience who may not know Tim Samuels, I have an entrepreneurial audience. What's your usual intro? How would you describe yourself?
I would say sort of author, documentary maker, BBC, National Geographic broadcaster. You know, general bloke, that kind of thing.
I love it. And so you've got a new book coming out in July 16th, Future Man. And so talk to us about the premise of Future Man. I'm excited.
So yeah, it's sort of subtitled How to Evolve and Thrive in the Age of Trump, Me Too and Mansplaining. It's sort of an honest look at what's going on with men and masculinity at the moment. I think these are really interesting and challenging times to be a guy. You know, on the one hand, men are seen as very dominant and things are going great, and I think that's fine for the guys at the top. But I think for a lot of ordinary men, these are difficult times. You know, that basic hunter-gathering is really difficult in this modern economy. We're not going to probably naturally do better than our fathers and their generation. And I think guys are a bit lost, so it's trying to be really honest and insightful about what's going on with men at the moment, and then suggest some positive ways to harness masculinity rather than the negative ways which seem very dominant at the moment. If you look at what's going on with men's mental health, if you look at the kind of rise of populism, I think a lot of that is fueled by men who are having a really hard time of things at the moment. So this is about how to kind of tap into the age-old ways of being a man, but in kind of smart, modern ways.
So what do you think is the #1 problem facing the modern man right now?
I think the economy. I think as men, we tie so much of our identity and our self-esteem to our jobs. You know, it's how we define ourselves, and it is our hunter-gathering. It's how we provide shelter. It's how people judge us as well. And in this economy, if you're doing well at the top, things are just fine. But I think for a lot of guys, it's paycheck to paycheck, it's insecurity, it's the gig economy, and that's before automizations really kicks in and robots start doing people's jobs. So I think that insecurity, that economic inequality is something which has really affected a lot of men. You know, for a lot of guys, their standard of living has really declined, you know, in the last couple of decades. You know, the middle classes haven't been doing terribly well. And if you look at parts of Europe as well, where there's really strong youth unemployment and young men out of jobs, that's where, you know, this radicalism is kicking off. So women really not our enemy. It's not about equality, it's about the economy.
And so what's your suggestion? How do we fix it?
I mean, on a macro level, it's dealing with some of the economic shifts which are going on, which I guess means having the skills to thrive in the future economy. You know, unfortunately for guys, working with your hands probably isn't really an option. You know, it's about having the education and the skills to have jobs which are going to be there in the future and are going to do well. You know, I think governments have got a part to play. I think it's about closing inequality and spreading wealth around a bit more. And then I think on an individual level, you can say, okay, you know, maybe there are other legs to the stool that aren't just dependent on work. So, you know, work's always been a place where you have your community, and you know, especially when we used to be parts of trade unions and stuff, or do manual work. So how else can I be around a community? You know, what can I do in my week that is going to, you know, whether it's going to a sports event or something, where to be around other people and get that identity? Or can I have a hobby which is physically productive? You know, it's funny that guys who work as skilled labourers are twice as likely to be as extremely happy as people that work in an office. You know, there's something about being physically productive which you don't get when you're kind of sat in an open plan office, you know, a small cog in a big machine, and you don't see the fruits of your work. So it's maybe trying to find other ways to get that masculinity, you know, whether it's doing a martial art or being part of having a wider tribal identity or being physically productive, which previously might have come from work, and also being part of these, you know, big communities and extended families, which we're not really tucked into anymore.
Cool. I like it. My brain's firing with a whole bunch of different questions and like, which thread do I want to pull on? This is great. So my audience is more entrepreneurial. So there's a lot of people who will watch this on YouTube who will resonate with it. Not so much for the fact that of being a cog in a machine, because they've started their own business or they want to start their own business, but a lot of entrepreneurs don't make it. A lot of entrepreneurs that we're talking about, male entrepreneurs, they want to provide for their family. They want to support themselves. They want to, you know, they're telling their friends and on Instagram and the public-facing version that, look at me, I'm doing this thing and I'm having, you know, whatever success comes, but really they're not making it. And they are having a hard time paying their bills and they feel worthless. I mean, this is my story. When I was younger, I was 19, but I was making $300 a month and telling my friends that I was crushing it and living the entrepreneur life. Meanwhile, I hated myself because I felt like I was totally worthless. What's the advice to the male entrepreneurs out there who want to appear like they're doing well and actually go off and do well, but then inside they secretly hate themselves because they feel like they're not being productive and making money?
I think as men, we've got to get over this kind of machismo front that we project that I'm a success and everything's going all right. I don't think we need to do that in this day and age anymore. I think it's okay to, you know, I think part of it is being really open with those around you and saying, look, you know, I'm trying to launch this business. It's quite tough, and getting the emotional support that you need, because I guess if you're an entrepreneur and your brain's not in the right place, it's not going to happen. So I think it's being emotionally open and getting emotional support for what you need and looking after your mental health, you know, making sure that you are preventatively trying to de-stress and, you know, meditate and exercise and even meet up with other entrepreneurs on a kind of group level to make sure that you don't feel as though you're alone. So I think it's looking after your mental health, not projecting an image which you think is BS, that you feel is, you know, honest with yourself. You know, I think the machismo days of the 80s are over. But I also think give yourself kudos, because I think one of the strongest male drives is independence. I think it's something which we've always valued as men especially, is not being reliant on others. And when you go back to the turn of the 20th century, when men were kind of going into factories and doing those sorts of jobs, that's when the myth of the cowboy sprang up. It was kind of invented almost. Cowboys had been and gone because we wanted to project this kind of rugged independence. And if you look at the time of the American Civil War, 9 out of 10 guys were artisans or farmers or shopkeepers. They were self-employed. They didn't have bosses. And that gives you, as well as worries, it gives you a tremendous freedom. And there's something really emasculating about being the kind of cog in the office, which I guess a lot of your the people you engage with don't want to be. You know, they want to be independent. You know, there's an age-old masculine urge to be independent, to not be reliant on others, to be your own boss. But in this economy, that's tough. So I would say celebrate that urge, but do everything that you can to look after yourself mentally whilst going on what is a really tough journey, and don't live a lie. I think you can be honest to yourself.
Who do you think does a good job of this? If you had to look at, you're mentioning like cowboys, or maybe those are not the right role models now for 2019, 2020. Who does it well? Who's the person who's like, man, that guy is really doing a good job of all this stuff?
I mean, it's interesting, you know, people say, oh, who are the male role models? And it tends not to, you know, previously it was these kind of very macho characters, which again is perhaps just as they conjured up cowboys. Something like Mad Men has been so popular because we look at this kind of mythical era that's gone by when men really were men. A bit sexist and all that, but it was male independence. I think the guys that do it well, you know, the ones I seem to have most respect for aren't the ones who are shouting about it. They're the guys who really do pull off that balance of being successful at work, but successful in society and in families who are giving back, who are genuinely improving their communities, who are spreading their wealth around, who have a passion beyond just their work. So, I've spent a bit of time with a chef over here called Jamie Oliver, who, I think he's done some stuff in the States as well. And what you see with Jamie is, he's run his restaurants, he's done great on TV and books, best-selling, but he also runs schemes to give kids a chance who are otherwise going to fall through the cracks and end up in trouble, and train them to be chefs and transform their lives. So, and he's also got 4 kids and a wife and seems to be a great dad. So I'm more impressed by, not the guys who are showing off, who are flash, but the guys who are successful, a bit understated, but give back. Because the people who are lending a hand and pulling other people up, for me, I think that's proper masculinity. It's not the flashiness, it's the cars, it's the, when you leave this earth, what difference did you make? And if you have the privilege of being successful, how can you make people's lives better?
I think of Martin Luther King when he was trying to spread his message. One of the things he did best was he shone a light on the stories that people needed to pay attention to. He wasn't always on the front line himself, but he was shining a light. And I think that could be a really cool, even model for you to say, look at these men, and here's what you should learn from them. So when you see Jamie, I mean, I know him just through the media, but seeing how he wants to go into schools and eliminate junk food and all the stuff that he's doing, even having some kind of filter to say, like, here's what a good example looks like. Here's what you can learn from, and shining a light on people who are doing good, who aren't necessarily just the big loudmouths getting all the attention, but who are actually doing good of what a 2019, 2020 man should be.
That's just, I think that's the sort of guys that we are now. It's not about driving around in an open top Porsche, looking like the big I am. It's, if you look at what Bill Gates has done, in the end, he's probably going to be remembered for the strides he's made combating malaria and other diseases. It's almost, Microsoft is almost going to be the footnote. I just think, when you have achieved, you have an obligation to do that, and that's when, I look at someone that makes a lot of money as an entrepreneur, and I think, good on you. You've got the balls, you've got the brain, you probably had the luck. But let's take it to another level and see, what's the societal difference that you've made? Have you been a good boss? Have you been kind to the people that work with you? What's the kind of footprint that you've left behind? And you'll know more than me, but I don't think that's in opposition to being a great entrepreneur. I think the two can probably go hand in hand.
That expression of you got the balls kind of means something, but at least for me, it seemed to tap back into that machismo era. What would if you had to come up with a new expression to be something that you would challenge somebody on, right? Like, you don't have the balls to do it, but more of what a modern man should be. What would you make that expression?
I mean, heart's too obvious, isn't it? I suppose perineum's moving away from the ball slightly, but I don't know. I just think, it's cliche, but it's soul. Like, what's your spirit? What's your soul? What are you leaving behind? In your wake, what trail are you leaving? When you, people that come into contact with you, are their lives enriched? Are you leaving this positive experience? I don't know, like the balls to do good, the balls to buck the trend and say, I don't want to be this caricature of an entrepreneur. I want to be a rounded, decent, cool human, and that doesn't detract from my success. It only amplifies it. I really struggled on that answer, but there we go.
I like it. No, it's good. I like it. I don't know why it came to me, that question. Circling back on mental health, you mentioned a couple strategies. You mentioned having conversations, being willing to be open, joining physical activities like martial arts. Does it, if you're having conversations, does it matter who it's with? Is it better with your spouse? Is it better with your guy friends? Is it better in an anonymous group? Are they all the same? Do you have any research or just personal opinion on that?
I think it depends what really is on your mind. I mean, there are some things which are best dealt with by, a professional. Go and talk to a counselor or a therapist or a shrink. If it's something which feels like it's built up, it might be a knot that really does need untangling, or or sometimes you have these patterns of behavior that you repeat, and it takes a trained outsider to spot them and guide you away from them. Other times, I think it's just, I think there's a real value for men to spend time with their other guy friends. I think, it used to be the case over here until the 1970s that on Friday night, guys would go to the pub with their mates, and then Saturdays they take the missus. It feels, horribly outdated now. There was something to be said, though, for a group of guys going out together, and it's something that happens so rarely. As you get older and your friends kind of marry and move out to the suburbs, you don't see them as much. But, there's been research from a university in Scotland that, men that go to the pubs regularly with their mates have better mental health. Might not be good for their livers, but they have better mental health. And I think there's something to be said for making sure that you do carve out enough, for want of a better term, guy time. I think there's something quite grounding about going out with your old male friends, where you take the mick out of each other and things are just kind of put into context a bit more. So, I think it's about who's the best person, what's the problem, whether it's the kind of small maintenance stuff of chatting to mates or a spouse or a partner, or, if something is a bit more delicate, then go and talk to a professional about it. There's absolutely no stigma. You are more of a man to put your hand up and say, I think I need a bit of help here, than bottling it. The days of bottling it are long gone.
What do you think about adult men forming friendships? I think most people's friends would come from their youth, maybe high school, maybe university, college, where you spend a lot of time with people. But then, as you say, people grow up, they move, they leave the city, move to the suburbs, and then you're just kind of there with your work buddies, but they may not actually be your friends anymore.
Yeah.
For people who feel isolated, alone, with maybe a lot of connections, especially with like Instagram and Twitter, and you're connected to tons of people, but you don't actually have any friends. As an adult male, and I guess the advice applies to women too, but as an adult male, what do you recommend for going out and finding friends?
And that's especially true with older men who, when their spouses die, are very bad at making new friends. I think with men, often the answer is finding that shared hobby. It is, getting involved with, a sport or, something that you appreciate together, where you don't have the kind of forced nature of, I'm having to go and awkwardly talk to you, which is certainly an Englishman's worst nightmare, of having to talk to a stranger.
Right.
Maybe not for a Canadian. You're a bit more gregarious. But it's different. It's different if you're talking, about sport or woodwork or some sort of hobby that you have, or music, and then when you get to know someone, then I think the rest of the chat would follow naturally. It's difficult. I think you reach a certain age and you don't make many new friends. You're lucky to kind of see the old ones that you've had from school or university or from work. So, but I think it's about, well, it's recognizing that we are sociable creatures. We spend so much time alone, which is something that our ancestors never would have done. Cavemen weren't lonely. We were surrounded by extended families and tribes. It's really, I live on my own. It's a really odd situation to be in. And it's really bad for you unless you force yourself to get out there and be sociable. So I think it's just saying, this is unnatural for me to spend too much time on my own. I am going to go out, I'm going to join something, I'm going to go to something, and I am going to develop those friendships, because friendships, as you know, are they are the thing that get you through life.
For somebody who then would listen to that advice, I look at me, so I'm 39 years old right now. Somebody might say, well, at 39, I'm not going to go join a soccer league or a football league in England. People might say, like, I'm too old to go off and play sports. That's crazy.
But you might go and watch sport. You know, it might be that you go and watch the game together, or you go to a bar and you watch the game.
So how do I find that group, right? Like, if you're taking somebody who's my age or in their 40s, who might feel like they can't play the sport anymore, if they can't be really, you know, wouldn't be up to their standard, do I just go join a older league, or how do I find the person to go watch a game with?
Yeah, or I guess you know, if there's a team that you support, you kind of see, is there a local supporters club? Do they meet every week? Can I go along there? You know, at the point where all you have to be capable of is kind of lifting an arm to drink. I think that's going to see you through the next few decades at least, Evan. So, you know, it's just an excuse. The kind of hobbies are, you know, if it's cards or if it's theatre appreciation or crafts or making something, we have this kind of innate need to be around people. It's just an excuse. It doesn't matter what it is, really. It could be singing. It could be learning to dance. You know, whatever you happen to have an interest in, and you think you're going to meet like-minded people, and be proactive. You know, I see this with, you know, my dad and his generation, that unless the wives are kind of jollying them along, they're very hard to get out of the house sometimes.
Right.
And it's not good for them. You know, when men retire, it's a real issue. And even you know, and much younger than that, because, you know, we move around. We often live in cities we're not born in. You know, we don't have these networks there. You might move to the city to start a business. So I think it's about being proactive and daring to talk to people. You know, just pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. You know, it's rare that when you start a conversation you regret it.
How often do you think we need that? Should do, like, once a month, once a week, a couple days? Like, how often do we need that social connection, do you think?
I think as much as you can get it. I think, you know, the social connections are what we live off. We are sociable creatures, but we're living in these crazy times when we've never been more atomized or isolated before, or have these faux connections of sitting online and thinking we're connecting with people, and we're not. And it, you know, it does genuinely affect your health. You know, if you are socially isolated, it starts to physiologically impact you. You know, it can be as bad for you as smoking, you know, in its extreme. So I think, you know, get out there as much as you possibly can without, you know, driving yourself mad.
Cool. Well, the book is called Future Man. Comes out July 16th. Did I get that right?
Yes, correct.
And like everywhere, Amazon, all the spots, they can pick it up?
Yeah, you can pre-order it now, I think, on Amazon.
We have a link here that we'll put on the YouTube channel for Skyhorse Publishing. Is that where people can pre-order for it?
They can pre-order from Skyhorse. They can pre-order from Amazon. It's nearly out, and I think it's something which appeals to. I think there's an honesty about being a man which will resonate for guys, and, you know, people have said to me, "Oh, I've not been able to say that out loud, but thank you for sharing those thoughts," whether it's around dating and relationships or mental health or work. And I think for women as well, it's, if you want to know what's going on with men, we're not always the best at articulating that. So here is what's going on inside a man's brain, for better or worse.
There's a deep dive. Cool. So Future Man's the book, and if people want to find more about Tim Samuels, follow you on your journey, where do you want them to go next?
I guess my Twitter, which is @TimSamuels, and I'll promise to try harder and put more posts out there.
All right, I love it.
And be as prolific as you, Evan.
Listen, I built a business off of it, so you don't have to get that far. But yeah, I mean, I especially love the idea of if you're able to shine a light on different examples. That's the thing that I default to. Like, here's what Jamie Oliver is doing, or here's what my dad does, or here's what somebody else does, to shine that light of excellence and say, oh, okay, just to put it on the radar so that people can have other role models and heroes to look up to too.
And also, you know, just find very practical, I think they're very tangible, practical things you can do as a man, which will tap into your masculinity in a good way and make you feel better and be more successful. So I think these are crazy times. We are walking around in cavemen bodies. You know, we're sort of chimps in a suit. And there are ways to kind of indulge that, but by being kind of smart and successful and modern and egalitarian as well. So I think there's some, hopefully there's some good tips in there.
I appreciate it. Well, good luck with the launch, man. I'm glad to be a small part of your journey, and I'm looking forward to seeing the book come out and crush.
Thank you, Evan. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Okay, much love. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And if you want to see my interview with Dave Hollis, check the link right there next to me. I think you'll enjoy it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
We're here for a single reason: put tools in people's hands that let them change their lives.